Welcome to Clarksville Vibe the show. We are here to tell the stories about people who live here in Clarksville, Tennessee that make this place the greatest place to live in America. I'm your host, Kevin Kennedy Jr. I'm super thrilled to bring you another guest from our community who's doing great things. Has been in our community for a long time, came via the military, and is one of those people who intentionally chose to make this home and is really taking some risks in different areas, pioneering new territories, helping us stay well as a community. So I'm really excited to hear more. His name is Syner. He does a lot of things, and I don't want to butcher this bio intro anymore. So we're going to go ahead and transition into the interview with him. Cliff, thanks so much for being here.
Kevin, thanks for having me on. I'm really excited. I've watched your podcast for a while, and you've had some amazing guests, and so it's been really cool to see.
Well, I definitely have the easiest job. I just get to ask people to talk about themselves and what they do with their life and their mission in life, and I just get to sit back and listen to it and gain value from it. So you've been someone that I've had on the list for a while, and so I'm glad it worked out to finally make this happen.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Good deal. So you've got a really intriguing story to me. You know, I'm a lifelong fifth generation Clarksville native, like grew up on the same horse farm that my grandfather, was on for however long his, growing up there. And you come with a little bit of a different story, right? You came via the military, right? You had a series of service record there, and then you've now chosen to call it home. So tell us in just a little brief snapshot, kind of what did that military history look like for you, and what was it about Clarksville that may have been different from some other places that you said, hey, this is a place that we want to invest in?
This is home.
Yeah.
So in 2003, I joined the Army, and we're just like everybody. You're going through AIT, and I was in the medic course, and we're waiting on your orders to come in. And Lisa is actually my wife. Lisa's checking more than I am online, and so she calls me and is like, "Hey, we got orders. We're going to Fort Campbell." And I was like, "Where's that at?
What is that?" Yes.
Yeah, like I don't even know, And so then we seen that it's in Kentucky, but most of it's actually in Tennessee.
Yeah.
So we got here, and we were very young, brand new to the Army, just trying to figure things out. We had one child at the time, my oldest son, and I just found that this community was so welcoming, to the military, even though we were, so lost and so confused. And, 2003, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, there was so many deployments. And for most of my deployments, Fort Campbell was home. And I just was so amazed at how well I felt like this community was taking care of my family while I was gone.
Did you guys live on base, off base?
We used to live off of Fort Campbell Boulevard behind the Walmart over there. And then we lived on post for a little while. We lived off of Exit 1. That's where we bought our first house. Yeah. And then we live where we live now for a while. So.
Yeah, well, that's exciting. Yeah, you mentioned those years, and trying to put your brain back into that time is actually a really strange place, kind of military-wise, in our country's history, right? Mm-hmm. We're coming off of 9/11, big activity happening in the Middle East. And I remember I graduated high school in 2003, and I remember just the feeling of like almost everyone in our community at that time had a yellow ribbon magnet on their car that was like, support our troops, you know? Yeah. And it was the first time in my life that we'd really been through, at least where I was old enough to pay attention to it, that we'd been through a conflict. I didn't really remember the first Desert Storm, but in that time I remembered it. And my dad always made notice. He said, son, you see the traffic's not as heavy. Soldiers are not here right now. And it just, I remember feeling that. And so it's really interesting that you would say that time period is where you felt most supported, because I think for the lifelong Clarksvillians, there was a kind of a real sense of unknown in the community of what does this look like long term? It's unknown and where does this play out in the world on the scale that we were doing it, and also how much Fort Campbell was affected. Mm-hmm. So as a lifelong Clarksvillian, it's kind of one of those, it's good to hear that someone not from here came here, military, young family, and felt supported at that time enough to call it home. I want to get to, kind of mission-wise where you are now, and then we'll backtrack from there. But that career as a medic in the military led you to a lifelong pursuit of healthcare. And what I'm really admire about your story is you've continued to kind of, each new experience has allowed you to shift in mindset a little bit, and you've got something going on in town right now that's extremely unique, kind of one of a kind. I remember when I first came to town in 2013, 14, I remember seeing your name on a lot of medical histories at that time. And then I know that you went away for a little bit and you've come back and now you have Risen Wellness.
Yeah.
So let's kind of start the conversation there. Tell us about Risen Wellness. And I think that may lead us back into, some of the history of how we got here. But I think it's really important for the people who are listening, once they hear what you're doing right now, why you're doing it, how it's important to you. I know they're going to want to stick around throughout the whole episode.
Yeah. So Risen Wellness is a nonprofit functional medicine clinic. And a lot of people don't know exactly what functional medicine is, right? So, sadly, it's one of those catchphrases that it could mean a whole lot of things, but I think at its core, it's about root cause medicine. And we just want to know what's actually driving the dysfunction. And so we look at the body holistically, right? These different systems that we have, and we think about, is there an imbalance here somewhere that is preventing the body from healing the way that we've been created to heal? And that type of medicine can be hard to access. For one, it focuses on optimal wellness or optimal health, right? And so I think that in most conventional medicine, which is very important, it's focusing on symptom management, for the most part, which is important.
Sure.
We don't want people to drift off into chronic disease. But a lot of patients, they find themselves wondering, well, is there something else I could do? Diabetes, for instance. If you've been given metformin, which is the usually first line medication, sometimes people will be on that for a while and then they notice, well, this isn't really working. Then they got to go to the next medication. And so they may ask, well, why did I get this in the first place? And I think it's not that conventional medicine providers don't care or don't educate. I think it's that a lot of times they don't have the time.
Yeah. I'm catching my breath here because I felt that, it's like, I get it,
and, exactly.
And that is one thing that I really do wish that more people understood, is that every provider is really, really well-intentioned. Mm-hmm. And even if, they may not align with a different mindset of how we approach how to get healthy, everyone that I know, they really do wake up and try to do the best for the patients in the system that they're given, in the practice that they're given, in the, whatever it may be, whoever's paying for the services, how the services are being paid for. It's a really difficult maze to navigate, which is why I feel like, your story is really intriguing to me, because essentially, from what I understand, you mentioned the word nonprofit. It's like you've almost had to create this street access to receive these types of services, because it doesn't often fall into where it's just the easy, hey, you Google something, your insurance works here, it does this. Like you kind of have to step back and say, okay, not only are we going to think about how the body functions differently, we're going to think about how people access this care differently. Right.
Yeah. And I think that was such an important part to me, because I think if you're going to make a difference in a community, in the healthcare of a community, it has to be available to everybody who desires it. Not everybody wants it. I mean, one of the big
it's also
things, one of the big jokes that people say is, I don't know if I want to go see Cliff. He's probably going to change my diet or ask me to walk.
Yeah, he's going to tell me to walk more.
Right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, in the end, I think we know that we need these things. Yeah. Right. And I read a book in seminary, and it was about evangelism in Africa. It was written by a bishop in Africa. And he was talking about the importance of meeting the physical need, of being the hands and feet of Jesus physically, as well as sharing the gospel message of freedom. And one of the things he talked about was, even before they would plant a church, they would go in and they would start a school, or they would start a clinic, or they would bring a dentist, right? Because these are big needs that they have, right? And, in the United States, we don't really have a problem with access to care. If somebody wants a doctor's appointment, they could get one,
right?
If they need to go to the ER, there's an ER. There's a couple of them around. Yeah. They can go to those. But I think we struggle with access to this type of care that's going to really sit down with a patient, spend 45 minutes to an hour with them, explain everything. I mean, I love education because I feel like it's power.
Sure.
And if we educate the patient on exactly what's happening in their body, then we begin to give them the tools to help them be responsible for their own health, which is so empowering.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that in a lot of ways, we need that, especially here in Clarksville, and in Tennessee, in the South in general. And that's really what brought us back here.
Yeah. When do you feel like you first got the bug? Because I can, in my dental education, you're kind of narrowed into this focus. You take this board exam that leads to this board exam. The board exams have probably been the same for 40 years, and it just, you get this one kind of focus on education. And then I remember getting out and, you're stuck being told like, hey, this is exactly the way it is based on what you were taught in school. And then I have some experience where I'm like, I don't know that that's true. I kind of see something different. Maybe if I approach it this way, or what if I try this, or I've heard this, let's try it. And it works. Okay. Now I've got to open my mind to it a little bit. And, it sounds like for you, I would assume that this functional path that you're kind of on now is not maybe the same type of way you thought about treating the body as an Army medic. And so like, when do you feel like that shift started to occur?
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying really resonates with me, because it's like this pursuit of excellence. It's sort of like, okay, I'm doing this, but like, what else? What else is there? Or how else can I help? Or can I do more?
Right. Yeah.
And so I started out as a regular Army medic, and I loved that part of my job. But then I asked that question, like, what else can I do, or can I do more? And so I moved into special operations and became a flight medic. And so we were working with people who desired optimal health. Right, these special operators, right? So these are the fiercest warriors in the world, right? And that was my job to take care of them. And so, what I noticed is that like they would come to see me for knee pain or whatever, and they're not just like, my knee hurts, can I get out of a run or something, right? They're like, I want to get better, and I don't just want ibuprofen,
right?
Like I want to know what's wrong with my knee and what can I do, and I think them asking me that question and me really wanting to have the answer just kept leading me step after step.
I love that. That's a really, I don't think that I would have put those two together without you telling me, but it does make a lot of sense, because you are dealing with extremely high achievers.
Right. Yeah.
Which, for the record, if any fifth group guy happens to be listening to this, there's nothing more terrifying than being a dentist behind a closed door to a daughter of a fifth group guy who comes in, he's got his snapback backwards, it's like, I know you're fifth group. You can probably kill me faster than I can take this tooth out. Like, right. Practicing in this town, like you're that guy. Yeah. I don't stand a chance, know?
Yeah. It's one of the really cool things about Clarksville is that, you never know who is around you. We're such a transient environment, that it's really wild. We have a very diverse population.
But they're all, I've got several friends who are retired now, and, I get to see some of the active guys. They're just amazing people, and it's really cool to hear your story that they helped spur this next kind of part of your learning journey. So what did that look like? You're now like, hey, I have this interest, right? You're doing this while you're still serving in the military. You get out and you decide to call Clarksville home. Hey, we like to stay here. Are you a nurse practitioner at that time? Like, what's the title that you have that allows you to serve? And then who are the people in the community at that time who are helping you guide this transition from, okay, I'm a flight medic for special operators, and then now I'm treating the farmer, I'm treating the teacher, the cop, the whomever, like your average citizen. And what was that transition like? Was it more freedom? Was it less freedom? What was that time?
So in 2008, I went to PA school in the Army. The Army has a program for that. And so I did my first year down in San Antonio and my second year up here at Fort Campbell. And then after that, we went to Hawaii. Okay. And so while I was in Hawaii, I actually began to be more interested in natural health, or, for instance, the pineapple core has more of the enzymes that help lower inflammation than the rest of the pineapple does. And so, just learning things like that, and then being, telling patients that are like, well, I don't want ibuprofen, and it's I've done an X-ray, everything's okay. And I'm like, okay, well, I don't know, let's try some pineapple enzymes and just, see what happens, right? And so just kind of started learning about things like that. And then I deployed to Afghanistan. And at that time, when we were deployed, we were on the border with Pakistan, and I was the only healthcare provider, well, at least Western healthcare provider, in about a 50-mile radius. And I got the opportunity to be really close with a local doctor. and got to like meet his nurses, and we were talking about different things. And one of the things that he mentioned, to ask him, I'm like, what do you guys deal with here? You know, what's really hard for you to treat? And he said, they have this huge problem with infant mortality and babies dying. And, you know, I didn't know at the time until I got into this conversation that Afghanistan has one of the worst infant mortality rates in the world. And so I began to talk to him, and what I realized is that it's really a public health problem, because he would teach his patients, so if a mom would bring a baby in and the baby has diarrhea, he would tell the mom, well, stop breastfeeding, because in their mind, liquid in was causing liquid out, and that we need to dry things up for a while. Unfortunately, that is a devastating treatment. And so obviously, you know, babies will die from that. And so I reached out to Johns Hopkins. They have a big public health program. And so they kind of got me some resources, and we actually started a radio show over there where I would speak to the doctor, and then somebody would interpret. And it was real popular because, you know, they hear English on the radio, and
sure.
they think that's cool, right? We got to make such a huge difference in these 6 little villages around our area. We actually got to watch the infant mortality rate decrease in our time there.
Wow.
And I was like, this is amazing work. And I remember praying, like, you know, God, like, I wish that I could continue to do this work, or like something like this that has this much impact. I knew that there was no way I was going to get Lisa to bring my kids to Afghanistan. You know?
Not on the table.
Yeah, that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So I began to think about, like, what diseases or what health issues do we have in our country that really is about mindset and just in public health, and like, really, if you just knew that this thing you're doing is actually really harmful, if I could just teach that, then maybe we could make a big difference, right? And so I'm from a really small town in the mountains of West Virginia, and chronic disease is really bad there. Similar actually to Tennessee. And I just remember thinking, you know, like things like type 2 diabetes and heart disease, blood pressure problems, like these are lifestyle things. You know, these are things that we're doing to ourselves in the way we eat and the way we handle stress and the way we don't sleep enough, and, you know, all of those kind of things. And so I just began to pray about that and start to feel this passion about how can I learn more about those types of things, the way that I had learned about, you know, infant diarrhea and malaria and you know, those in Afghanistan, and where would we apply those things. And we had always loved Clarksville. The joke is that we kept having kids here whenever we were here. So, so we really felt called to come back to Clarksville. And once I started kind of looking at chronic disease rates around the country, Tennessee really does stand out, and it doesn't have a great reputation, you know, for health, and there's a lot of need here. And so I knew that there was a possibility of a big impact. And so we came back to Clarksville after I finished up with that deployment. We'd finished up our time in Hawaii. I was now a PA, so I came back here, and then got a job at a local primary care clinic and started, you know, seeing patients. Yeah. So it was, you know, at the first primary care place I worked, it was awesome. I mean, it was a Christian-based company. The doctor that ran the clinic was a wonderful, godly Christian man. But the limitation was that we had 10 minutes to see patients. And sometimes that included the time that they had to get their vitals taken. Mm-hmm. So it sometimes felt like medical jeopardy. You know, sure. you walk into a room, you glance at the vitals. I've already looked at their labs. I'm going to give you a refill. Does that sound good? I'll see you in 3 months.
That's right.
And I'm out the door. And so, but that passion of education and that opportunity to educate just wasn't there. Mm-hmm. And so that was tough. That was really frustrating.
And so when you're recognizing this passion, I'm sure you're going home at night and talking about it like, I mean, I enjoy what I do. It's important, but it's just there. I feel like there's something more. And so tell us a little bit about the journey of, you know, kind of trying to create a way to add more time into the day. Like what were some of the challenges? What were some of that feedback that you were pushing up against, you know, that you had to overcome? You know, what was that like? Because now I think fast forwarding, your time is what you make it. And you've
Right.
kind of made a model that allows you to invest yourself into it to whatever degree you want. You're not limited by 10 minutes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I started saying, well, like I'm not okay with just giving this medicine and not doing some education. So I started just creating resources around different food plans and different things that had some evidence-based medicine behind it, right? Because there, like you had mentioned before, I mean, there's so many different options out there, and like, who do you really listen to? So, you know, I do have a medical license, and I don't just want to do the most trendy thing, right? I want to actually help my patients with things that we know are going to be helpful. So I'd make these resources, and I'd talk to people about diet, but I still only had this 10 minutes, right? And so that was really tough. And so I began to learn about a clinic that was here before. They're in Nashville now, called the Maxwell Clinic. And I got a chance to meet David and Janet Hossey and just learn what they were doing. And so they kind of introduced me to functional medicine and like what that is. And so, you know, I all I knew is that I wanted to do things more naturally and I wanted more time.
Yeah.
And so he began to educate me, gave me the chance to go to the Institute for Functional Medicine, which is really the main place where you get educated in functional medicine. It's a lengthy certification process, but there's a lot of education involved. And so we would get an hour with our patients. So I had all the time, you know, that I needed. But, you know, that meant that we had to be outside of insurance, which was really tough. And it meant it's expensive. I mean, all of the time, the nurse's time, you know, my time, all of that, you know, is very expensive. Even though, you know, if you really look at it dollar for dollar, it's still cheaper than regular medicine, right? It's just that the visit is an hour instead of 10 minutes. Yeah. So, you know, that was where it just really began to take off. Like I really began to understand. And I remember it's like one of those memories, you know, you have these memories that are like seared in your brain. Yeah. And I can remember looking out the window and it was raining there at the Maxwell Clinic. And I'm sitting with a patient and we're talking about lifestyle changes. And there's 5 main ones that we discuss. And so I'm going through them. I'm talking about nutrition and sleep and stress and relationship. And I'm just seeing this rain out here and I'm seeing the green grass next door, and it just hits me that this is like the Garden of Eden. Like I'm asking people to live like we live in the Garden of Eden, right? I'm asking. Sure. And if you look back at creation, you see that each day God said it was good, right? And then he gives us this garden, this creation to not only enjoy, but to steward and to care for. And so what clicked and what I think is so amazing is that when we live into this design that God has for us, then our bodies flourish. And I was like, wow, like why don't we hear about this, right? Why don't we talk about this? And so
did you have to cut that visit short? Be like, hey, I'm sorry, I just had a monumentous revelation of life. I got to come back to you later.
No, I think probably what happened is that visit ended up being 2 hours.
Sure,
because
probably
I was
so. Like,
excited.
I just need to process this with someone right now.
Right, that's right. That's right. You're not going to believe this.
Yeah.
So, you know, I was already a strong Christian at that point, and I hadn't always been. I mean, I had, through the military and different deployments, like I had struggled with my faith. But at this point, I had a good grasp and understanding of my faith in Christ. And I knew that, you know, these things fit together. And I wanted to understand like how, you know, and so that's where I'd been meeting with a pastor for a while and felt this call towards ministry, but didn't really know what that looked like because I do love my job and I love caring for patients. And so I knew that was going to be part of it, but, you know, I didn't know exactly what would be the next step. And I remember talking to Dr. David Hossey and I was telling him about this. And he told me, he said, well, Cliff, you know, as you sort of seek out this dream, he was like, you know, you should hybridize. You know, you don't just leave what you're doing and move to the next thing, but you take what you've learned and then you carry that forward. Wow. And I think that little piece of advice, it really has stuck with me. And so my time in seminary, our family moved to Nashotah House, which is in Wisconsin. And what's really amazing about the school, it's been there since 1842. They have morning and evening prayer and communion every day of the week since 1842. And so this idea of habit, which I already fully understood in lifestyle and the importance of that, like that was part of the spirituality. It was a habit to the spirituality that forms us. And they talk a lot about formation. And I began to understand like this sacramental worldview that God, he created what we see in Genesis. He created all of this in order to show us love and to interact with us. This is the way that he does that. He interacts with us through creation. And I mean, it's just beautiful and it's profound and it begins to make sense.
Yeah.
I'd mentioned that my family, I'm from West Virginia, and they struggle with chronic disease. And I remember the same pattern over and over of like, people would struggle with chronic disease or, diabetes or something. And there would be all of this like prayer and desire to see this disease taken away. But there was no real like lifestyle change and there was no real understanding, so I don't look back and be like, that there's no sort of blame. There was no understanding, right? That actually God's desire for us to grow and heal is in what he has given us in creation. Now, of course, he works miracles, right? But the normative way that he meets us is in our daily life and our patterns of living.
That's pretty powerful. And it's really interesting to almost hear that, of course, you started with this pursuit of gaining knowledge via health, right? Through health. And then that led you to this revelation that's like, well, actually, creation in itself is God's intention to allow ourselves to heal. And yet that kind of looped you back into this, you're doing both now. And you've created this hybrid model for yourself where Risen Wellness is a really big part of what you do, but also pastoring people in the traditional sense is a really big part of what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So we felt called to come back to Clarksville because the Maxwell Clinic had moved to Brentwood primarily. They were no longer in Clarksville. There was a small little Anglican church plant that we had been a part of. And because of the pandemic and that priest there, he'd moved down to Murfreesboro. So there was no longer an expression of this way of worship that I'm talking about, this connection to creation through God. That it was sort of gone. The Maxwell Clinic was gone. And my wife, Lisa, had just finished up her master's degree in clinical mental health. And she has a real passion for specifically treating people with trauma and people who have like kind of walked through some hard things. And, Clarksville has a lot of trauma, both military and non-military, and it's a very transient area. And we love this place. And so we did feel called to come back. And I knew though that as we planted a church and thought about what does it look like to be a church that cares for the spirit and the body, right? This whole person. What does a ministry in healthcare look like, And so we just began to pray through that, and we thought about this model of being a nonprofit. So we accept donations, and that allows us to keep a very low overhead, so that we can keep, even though we don't accept cash or we don't accept insurance, we can keep that cost really low.
Right.
And that's the desire. And we're hoping to also have more education so that patients who, can't come to see us or don't have time or whatever reason, that they're still able to access that through other ways here in the community.
Yeah. I think one of the things that you brought up that we were talking a little bit before the episode, but almost how Lisa and your visions have somewhat aligned in this journey now where you are. And so you talked a little bit about her experience, and, I've witnessed it, seen it, been blessed by it firsthand, and know several people who have, and she is an absolute rock star, super, super caring, and very practically helpful. I think that's really unique in her skill set. And she's amazing at what she does. Yeah. But it's interesting to me to hear how life has had you on your kind of own journey, and Lisa's obviously kind of in one together throughout the whole thing, but it's now your purpose has blended together in where you are now. So tell us a little bit more about that, about what she does and how you feel like that supports even just your lifestyle change of the 5 things that you mentioned, things like diet and movement and sleep and things like that.
So one of the things that I noticed is that education is actually not enough, right? I mean, because we can explain and teach, and we can show labs, and we can even make it very personal. Like, this is your blood work. This is what's going on in your body. But we've got these coping mechanisms that are sometimes rooted in our past trauma, or sometimes they're just rooted in our environment. In the South, I mean, we love sweet tea and fried chicken and, barbecue, and those things are delicious.
Yeah.
And they mean fellowship.
Yeah. And college football means the diet doesn't count,
That's
right?
exactly right.
It's
Yeah,
Saturday
right.
in the fall, there is no diet.
Right. We get a pass.
That's right.
We get a pass. I mean, we say that and it's funny, but the truth is that biology doesn't give us a pass.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I think what Lisa brings is this ability to really be able to touch that pain that people feel, and that people that really hold people back in these coping mechanisms that have worked for them in the past. I mean, it has to be coming from a place where you're not saying like, oh, I can't believe I did this to myself, or I can't believe I used to do, like, those things are just so unhelpful. We got to think about like, well, that was what my body felt like I needed to do in that moment to get through whatever I was going through now, but it doesn't have to define me.
Yeah.
And she has taught me so much, right? And I think even changed the way that I approach some things, probably with a lot more gentleness, rather than just like, hey, these are the labs, this is what it says.
That's right. Yeah.
This is the treatment. So I think we've got some things that we've been like thinking about and praying about, where we're working together with groups and looking at like, brain health and traumatic brain injury. And there's just so many things that, we can do and that Clarksville really needs, already. So, and we see
you've probably seen that too. I know that your ability to see all of the people who want to see you is actually limited, even with cost, even with, location, services, things like that. It's still, Cliff Syner's been in high demand, and your time is still very limited. And so you've added a provider.
Yes.
Risen kind of continues to grow. I think Lisa's providing services, and as you kind of merge those things together. But where do you think the future in Clarksville looks like for something like Risen, as more people become aware of it? And obviously, we're trying to. The access to care is there, but still, your time is somewhat limited.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it does include growth, like you mentioned. I mean, we just recently onboarded Caroline Wilson. She's a nurse practitioner, and like yourself, a Clarksville native.
Yeah.
And so
everyone still calls her Caroline Burchett.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
She's going to listen to this and be like, no one calls me that anymore. Well, I still get called KC from everybody who knew my parents.
They do. They
Yes.
do. Because I hear when they come into clinic and they're like, Caroline Wilson, Burchett. Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I know. We grew up together.
But she has such a passion for health. And it's been really exciting. I mean, she already comes with this, like with her just a strong desire to see people be well. And then just seeing what she's done. She's been with us since January, and already, I mean, patients are just loving her, and she's providing so much great care. And so it's really awesome. I mean, I think we are trying to be very prayerful about the culture of Risen Wellness. And I think that also attracts the type of people that want to work there and that want to have an impact.
Right.
Yeah. So
you got to think about it differently.
Right. Exactly. So as we continue to grow, our hope is that we'll have a campus that will provide gardens. Community gardens are a big part of what we believe, being in nature, in creation, right? Spending time there. Even like we've talked about having a chapel that's there where people can come and pray, anytime they want. Sure. We're so inundated with sound and talking and, so it'd be great to just give people a place to come and just sit and be with God.
Wow.
And so that's part of the bigger vision.
I love how you're thinking about that. It's an encouragement to me, because I really find it hard to slow down.
Yeah.
I'm 39. I'm supposed to, my dad always told me, one of the things he told me growing up, he's like, if you in your 20s, you learn all you can. If you're in your 30s, you work all you can. 40s, you shift your business, you kind of earn all you can. Your 50s and 60s will be just fine. And it's like, it was grained in my head, but in my 30s, it was grained in my head, work,
Right.
And it's just like, I don't even know how to stop sometimes. Yeah. But like when you say that, it's like, I feel this, like, yeah, I need that. But I don't, it's not here. It's not easy for me to access. So I just don't do it,
Yeah. Right.
But one question that I, wanted to give you the opportunity to kind of talk about is, and you can even use myself as an example, I'm mid to late 30s, kind of in this area of life where I'm like, okay, I do have to pay attention to my body now. I'm not in my early 20s, and don't, nothing matters, that everything's going to be just fine. I'm also not, entered into a level of disease. I'm trying to make healthy choices for myself, for my kids, but I feel it's so hard to figure out, as you mentioned before, like who to trust, what sources of information are valid, which ones are just going for clicks and likes and things on social media, which ones have some real science backed up to it. What is real science? We don't even really know what that is, but it's like, I'll flip through videos and, the first thing I see is this drink is full of this poison. And then the next one's like, hey, check out this drink. It's got all these great vitamins and minerals and things in it. And you're just left with, how do I even interact with the world that we live in 2024 in America now?
Yeah.
And if we try to choose health, it's like we're stuck between these. My insurance pushes me this way. A guy on Instagram says, don't do that. And it's really hard to make those decisions. So for someone who is at least maybe in the early stages of just kind of exploring that thought of what does it look like to really take care of my body, what were some basic tips that you would say, hey, here's how you start to make those decisions, or here's some maybe just early things that you may not have thought of before?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because I think there is so much confusion.
Yeah.
And one of the easiest ways, the easiest thing that you can sort of ask yourself is, what does it look like to live within the created order as I've been designed to live?
Say that one more time.
So what does it look like to live as I've been created to live within the created order?
Yeah. Somebody's going to take some notes on that.
Yeah.
That's a question to keep you up at night.
Right. That's right. But I mean, I think that when we look around, right, look at food that is ready to harvest seasonally, right? Think about what is available locally to me, right? And recognize that, while supplements can provide an important part sometimes, I like to say we live in a broken world, right? And so sometimes what we're eating, drinking, consuming, whatever, sometimes it's not perfect, just because it's organic or just because whatever. But trying to eat wholesome food the way that it grew is going to help make sure that we get most of the vitamins, that we need.
Sure.
And like living within community, like-minded community of people that recognize that our health is important and that it's not separate from our spiritual life.
Yeah.
We're not Gnostic. We don't believe that we just need to escape reality and or the physical world and get off into spirituality. Like, we believe that these things are all created together. And the other thing that I think sort of in line with that is thinking about the blue zones. Have you ever heard of those before?
You talked about in one of the lectures you gave. I remember hearing about that. It was the first time I ever heard about it. So you need to explain what you mean by that.
So the blue zones are these areas around the world where people tend to live the longest and be the healthiest. So initially, this was found by...
and by that, you mean like Mississippi, right?
Yeah.
Just kidding. Sorry if anybody's from Mississippi.
Yeah, that's right. We do have one in the United States called Loma Linda.
In California.
Okay. Yeah. But most of these places are going to be places where they don't necessarily have the best hospitals or the best medical care. That's not actually what makes people the healthiest. What makes people the healthiest is how they live, how they interact with each other, and how they're interacting with creation. So these are going to be places where people have to, take their sheep down into the valley, or places where they have to go get their water, or even just have to walk to the market, to get their food, right? So I think it's important to build hardness into our day. And most people look at me like I'm crazy when I say that, right? So one of the things you could do is take like a 5 or 10 pound kettlebell and set it beside your bed. And when you wake up in the morning, you do like 10 squats with this kettlebell. And then maybe you carry it in your right hand, downstairs to the kitchen, and then you take care of whatever you're going to do there. And then you put it back in your left hand and you carry it back upstairs and you do a few swings and you set it down. That kind of mimics what it would be like to maybe go out to the coop and get the eggs, go to the well and get the water. And so you're adding these things that are harder, but they not necessarily mean I got to go to a gym.
Devastatingly hard.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And, we actually don't want things to be devastatingly hard. We don't need to train like Olympians. We need to train like we're living, So when I get done with my workout, I don't want to be so exhausted that I can't work the rest of my day, So like thinking about the blue zones and thinking about like living how we've been created. I mean, those are kind of broad, but if somebody wants to do a little exploration around that, then I think that's going to give them a good place to start.
Yeah. That's such an interesting answer. One thing that I've learned, in being a professional dental provider, being a human, being a dad, is that learning is just the key, and you got to kind of be open to, expanding your mindset. Professionally for me in the past, that has looked like my journey, becoming more aware of things like tongue ties and how breastfeeding is impacted by it. And I remember, I was my oldest or older daughter, she's 8 now. She was born. Adani was really struggling with breastfeeding, and the lactation consultant at the hospital said, "Hey, you might want to look into tongue ties." And I thought in that moment, really strong sense of pride. I was like, I know everything about tongue ties. Right. What are you talking about? There's not one. This is my perfect daughter here.
Right.
And come to find out, sat in a lecture 2 years later, and I was like, nope, that's what it was. Like, how did I miss that? How did I not think about that? And that kind of started my journey, just to be open-minded to that original kind of roadblock right in my brain of like, no, that's not why she's struggling. There's got to be something else. Like, I know everything I'm supposed to know about an infant's mouth. Well, I didn't. And kind of that little bit of humility of saying, okay, well, if this is valid now, what can I do to help? How can I serve? How can we create a system where people have access to it? How can I learn more about it? How can I make my technique better? And so I know that you've done that as well, and getting to where you are. And once you've done that in one area, it's kind of interesting how now your mind just opens up to so many other things, because you know that now your experience has been that a journey of learning really just kind of leads to a wholeness of health. Right.
Yeah. And you, you shared a little bit about your own story and your own daughter, and you can feel that frustration that so many patients have when they're like, something's going on here, and I don't seem to be able to find the person who can tell me.
Right.
And then now that you have that wisdom, and I'm so thankful that you're here in this community doing the work you do, because it really is impacting lives. I see the children and the parents who come to see me after they've been to see you, and there's this huge sense of like, finally somebody got me. Yeah. I got the care I needed, and now my baby can thrive.
Yeah.
And so being able to do that kind of work, it so reminds me of being in Afghanistan and seeing these mothers and these babies can now live and grow and flourish and be adults, right? Because of doing that kind of work. Yeah. And I don't see how you could ever do this kind of thing like we do and then stop and go do something else.
Yeah, no, it's not worth my time anymore. No, it's the most fun thing I do. Yeah. And I still do a lot of traditional dentistry of fixing cavities and taking out abscess teeth and stuff like that. But it is fun to think outside the box a little bit and help moms on their journey. Right. Either, if they're younger kids who are in speech or feeding therapy or breastfeeding, whatever it may be. But it's one of the gifts that I think God gave me early enough in my career to realize that I didn't have all the answers. And the answers that I thought I had may have been a little misguided, and they were well-intentioned. They really, really were, but they just may not have been overall well-informed. And the journey to then really be able to make a difference in people's lives has been really, really fun. And I'm curious where that leads me in the future. There's times where I'm like, okay, well, what's next? How can we make something else better? Right. And so usually it's the Caroline Wilsons of the world who tell me what that is before. Right. She's like, have you done this? Have you heard of this? Right. She'll keep me in check. Well, Cliff, thank you so much for your time. Yeah, man, this has been a real fun episode for me to hear more from your story, but also validate, our community, the strong sense of support that you felt and allowed you to choose Clarksville as home. When all of this journey kind of came to fruition, where does Cliff and Lisa decide to call home and create their businesses and continue to add value? Those seeds were planted in 2003, 2004, 2005 to a young family whose husband was deployed doing things that are really, really common in our community. And yet, so many years later, you guys are here now leading and pioneering and creating new things and restoring so many things that were broken. We're really, really appreciative of all the work that you do. And much thanks to Lisa too. I know the work that she does is incredibly important. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we're so happy to be here. We love this place. Yeah. Well, I'm curious to see where it leads next. Eventually I'll have to come check out your community garden with the chapel on site, just call it into existence, make it happen.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Yeah,
well, hey, if you have made it to the end of this episode, thank you so much. Thank you for finding our show, for continuing to stick with us. If you've heard multiple episodes and you continue to hear stories just like Cliff's today of people who are making a real difference in our community, who have long histories in our community like he did. And sometimes it's people who've only been here for a year or two and they're just doing such dynamic things that we want to spotlight those stories as well. So if this is your first episode, scroll through the previous episodes, maybe find a name that you know, find a name that you don't know, check it out. You'll find a lot of encouragement. You'll find a lot of insight into the ways that make our community tick and make this place what I believe is the greatest place to live in America. Thank you so much. We'll catch you on the next episode.